seismic doesn't do justice to how enormous a bombshell Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari was upon the driver market. The world's most frantic game of musical chairs kicked off, and when the music stopped, you had an 18-year-old in his old Mercedes seat, a bewildered Bottas off the grid, and the smooth operator of Carlos Sainz left to ip-dip-do across the lose-lose-lose selection between the then slowest trio of teams. Regardless of Williams' promising 2025 pace, Carlos has still swapped one of the best seats in the house for one with a more restricted view to the front. Such is the way of the driver market that even the best in the business can be left with the awful choice between rock racing and hard-placed Grand Prix. One driver who will have sympathised with Carlos's conundrum more than most is former world champion Damon Hill. During his time in F1, the man with the best eyebrows in the business rose the ranks from humble test driver to world champion, all via the odd tussle with a certain Michael Schumacher. This was all as part of a Williams outfit who were then comfortably the top dogs in town. And Damon's reward for 6 years of service and that smorgasbord of success was to be given his marching orders before his championship year was out. Like Sainz, Hill found the doors to the top-tier operations he best belonged at shut, locked, and with the key still in the hole. Forced to cast an eye much further down the order than he would have liked, Damon had to settle upon an outfit known simply as Arrows. Anyone with a vague interest in F1 history will tell you that Arrows were regularly at the lower end of the competitiveness scale, oft stuck with the tagline as the team with the most Grand Prix without a race win. In other words, not something a world champion should have been within a 500-mile radius of. Unlike Sainz though, Hill still held lofty ambitions upon his drop through the order. The Arrows of 1997 was a brand new outfit in everything but name, and filled to the brim with potential. A new owner had been installed, one with a toppling tower of trophies from his time in motorsport. The car would be designed by an engineering pioneer, powered by an exclusive engine deal, and running on possibly the best, most durable tyres around. Race wins were the lowest expectation from all parties, as this band of Davids took on F1's Goliaths. Naturally, there would be highs and lows. Highs like what might be one of the biggest underdog upsets of all time. Lows like what occurred for about 95% of the rest of the year. For despite all the potential promises and hyperbole before the year began, the combination of the new wave Arrows plus the reigning champion produced just a mere handful of points amidst a coughing splutter of unreliability and disharmony en route to one of F1's worst title defences. Understanding how and why Hill went from the best in the business to an outfit that were midfield survivors on a good day is part of this story. The other is understanding why it not only went wrong, but why it went so badly wrong. This is the abysmal Arrows adventures of Damon Hill. Before we enter that series of unfortunate events, let's take the time to reflect on some happier moments for Damon. We mentioned it in passing in the introduction, but this was a guy who'd not only reached the upper echelons of the sport, but had been an integral part of the Williams-branded furniture set since 1991. He had racked up the testing miles throughout 91 and 92, and with his lap times matching that of Williams' GOAT Nigel Mansell, he impressed the higher-ups, notably the likes of Patrick Head and Adrian Newey. When a vacancy opened up at Williams for 93, the pair lobbied for Hill to take the drive, ahead of more proven candidates like Mika Hakkinen or Martin Brundle. Somewhat reluctantly, Frank Williams gave Damon the nod, and the Brit paid him back in spades. Entering a baptism of fire being paired alongside another F1 great in Alain Prost, and with the Frenchman coasting to world title number 4 that year, Hill still won 3 races of his own, and Head recounts how he was often sitting on Alain's tail in races and was very much the equal in speed. He was the perfect driver for us. Damon's reputation grew tenfold the next year as he ably stepped into the role of team leader after the passing of new teammate Ayrton Senna at Imola and rallied the Williams troops. Hill's title duel with Schumacher went all the way to the final round in Adelaide, where Damon was denied a first world title in controversial circumstances. With the expectation of another title charge in 1995, the wheels somewhat came off the Hill bandwagon, and though he won 4 races, the year was blighted with schoolboy errors as Hill was forced to settle for the runner-up position once more. But by 1996, the stars had seemingly aligned for Damon to finally emulate his late father Graham, a 2-time F1 champion. Pesky Schumacher had moved to Ferrari, who were a long way off from their dominating days of the future. Benetton and McLaren would be competitive, but not in the conversation for a title challenge. And Hill had his hands on the new Williams FW18, what would be one of the most successful car designs in F1 history, and with his only realistic opposition being his talented but inexperienced rookie teammate Jacques Villeneuve. What could possibly go wrong? After 10 of the year's 16 races, Damon was perched at the top of the table, having already won 6 Grand Prix and with a 15-point cushion back to Villeneuve. Williams were on the cusp of a 4th Constructors' World title from the past 5 years. Everything was as peachy as a Georgian peach farm in summer, and properly soured as the F1 circus crossed into Germany. Hill entered the Williams motorhome to find the latest edition of Autosport lying across the table, which was screeching the news that Williams were going to ditch Damon at the end of the year, and had already signed Heinz-Harald Frentzen as his replacement. Hill took it as well as a dog taking his medicine, and rounded on Autosport's Andrew Benson, promptly giving him both barrels. Though Williams and Head denied the rumours, and Hill declared it nothing but a sensational story, it would prove to be right on the money. A month later, Frank called Damon at home to pass on the devastating news. "Damon, we won't be asking you to drive for us next year. I have to do what's right for the team, and I am not going to change my mind." Within a week, Frentzen was confirmed as his replacement. The main question to tackle when it comes to a team choosing to drop their soon-to-be champion in favour of a talented but unproven new option is not one terribly eloquent, but more just the word why in bold, italics, all caps, and with a barrage of question marks after it. First to be asking that would be Damon himself, who recalled the moments after that phone call as like the bottom had dropped out of my world. Those more cynical, as most in the F1 world are, would point to a notorious track record when it came to Williams and world champions, namely the departure of the last 3 Williams champions immediately after winning the title. This was partly born of Williams' belief that a driver was merely a plug-in-and-play component for his cars, coupled with his hard steel attitude when it came to contract negotiations, never paying above what he deemed a driver was worth, as had been illustrated in the tempestuous falling out between himself and another Williams champion in Mansell. But it had been drilled into Hill as early as February of '96 that this wasn't a mistake Williams were about to make for the 4th time in a row. He didn't like all the criticism he'd had to take from the sponsors and from Renault, wrote Damon, and I took him to mean what he said. Many will say the matter was owing to the number of coins jangling their way into Damon's bank account, with British tabloids reporting he was demanding a £12 million salary going into the next year. That has been refuted by Damon, who has stated I never had a discussion with Frank about money at all in 1996, and that he would have happily accepted the same deal as he already had, with the only difference a bonus for winning the World Championship. The truth circulates back to that one line from Sir Frank, I have to do what's right for my team, and that's that there wasn't a better driving option than Hill for his team, but one that made a lot more commercial sense. Williams had ruled the roost for a long time now, but a sweeping number of changes were on the horizon. Engine partners Renault, who had powered them to endless titles and race wins, were pulling out of F1 at the end of 1997, and replacement partner BMW were still umming and ahhing over whether they'd return to the F1 fold. Following Renault's suit were sponsors Rothmans, and though a replacement had been sourced in the form of Winfield, it was likely they would be a short-term measure as parent company British American Tobacco were hotly tipped to divert their focus into a team of their own in 1999, what would become the BAR outfit. From a purely business standpoint, hiring the German Frentzen made an enormous amount of sense. It boosted their friendship tracker with BMW by a couple more hearts. And on top of that, the recent championship success of Schumacher had awoken a large number of Germanic industrial companies to the marketing potential of F1. Frentzen came to Williams with healthy backing from automotive company Sonax, which could help plug the gap from that drop in sponsorship money. It is widely believed, and Damon has also claimed, that his clunky conclusion to 95 had left Sir Frank increasingly disillusioned over his championship capabilities. With that lack of faith twinned to a consideration for his outfit's competitive future, Williams had actually signed Frentzen as long ago as October 95, 9 months before the Autosport story would break. The subsequent upswing in form then left Williams with a pan-galactic gargle blaster of a headache, and rumours suggested he had spent a good chunk of 96 trying to wriggle out of his contract with Villeneuve to avoid the embarrassment of losing another Williams champion, which proved unsuccessful. Whatever the truth, reflects Damon, I suspect that our negotiations with Frank were a sham, and that he never had any intention of carrying them through properly. It was a decision that would have rippling consequences throughout the team and their ongoing status at the front of the field. Newey, who had designed the army of dominant Williams machines that had stormed the front of the field for most of the 90s, was furious to learn not only of the matter in which his friend Damon had been treated, but a total lack of consultation with himself on the matter. It prompted his departure to McLaren at the end of the year. McLaren would soon take Williams' mantle at the top of the table in 98, whilst Williams would never win another title after 1997. Though Damon signed out his Williams tenure in style, winning on his final outing in Japan to take his first world title, the latter part of the year had been decidedly more wobbly and nervy than the first part had been, which was unsurprising really. As Damon attempted to buckle down and win that world title, he would have found no shortage of distractions from the swirling voices in his head. And they were all saying the same thing. As the great philosopher Valtteri Bottas would put it, what next? With his dismissal from Williams occurring so late in the year, most other competitive outfits had already sewn up their drivers for the following season. Of the remaining trio of the big four of the era, Ferrari, Benetton and McLaren, Hill has said the only discussions he had were with Ferrari's Jean Todt, and when the Frenchman stipulated it would be under the provision of being a definitive number 2 to Schumacher, Hill declared, "Forget it, why would I sign my own death warrant?" That left 2 parties in the hunt for Damon's signature, Stewart and Arrows. Stewart were the more emotional option, as team owner Jackie Stewart had raced alongside Damon's father in the late 60s and 70s, with Hill admitting, "I've always felt close to Jackie because of my dad." Stewart were gearing up for their Grand Prix debut in 97 after several successful years in the lower formula, and boasting extensive support from engine partners Ford. They had earmarked Damon as the perfect candidate for the role of experienced lead driver, and thanks to the backing from Ford, had the funds necessary for a champion's salary. But the prospect of joining a brand new startup was a bridge too far for Hill, yet he admitted it was extremely difficult to turn them down. Though there were flashes of promise from the Tartan Terrors the next year, they were still a long way from the finished article they would resemble a few years down the line. So that left Arrows. F1 mainstays since 1978, they were in many ways a latter-day Haas figure, a team whose modus operandi was as midfield survivors, very occasionally pinching the odd point or very rare podium, but who held the dubious distinction as the team with most races beneath their belt without ever winning one. Essential items like drivers, engines and sponsors were regularly in the habit of not sticking around for terribly long, and following the withdrawal of support from previous investors' footwork, they had now entered an era of taking on pay drivers like Taki Inui and Ricardo Rosset just to keep things ticking over. About as appealing a prospect for a reigning world champion as being presented with a list of chores when it looked like he might be off to Disney World. But Arrows was about to shift off in a whole new direction when a man called Tom Walkinshaw walked through the door. To call the Scot a motorsport mogul would not only scratch that part of my brain that loves alliteration, but would be an excellent description of his standing in the world of motorsport. The former racer turned team manager had seen his TWR, Tom Walkinshaw Racing Company, enjoy ample success across a variety of championships, from touring cars to sports cars to Le Mans, with iconic brands like Porsche and Jaguar. By the early 90s, he became engineering director of Benetton and was part of that unit which propelled Schumacher to his first world title. Keen to go his own way, in early 96, Walkinshaw successfully acquired 51% of Arrows' team shares from original founder Jackie Oliver. With that level of pedigree, most echoed Damon's sentiments. Everything this man touches becomes a winner, so together they should be worth watching. Shortly after the Portuguese Grand Prix in September, Hill flew back to the UK to tour the Arrows factory and signed on the dotted line with Walkinshaw for a reported $8 million salary. Crucially, from Damon's perspective, it was just a single-year deal. Tom was the only person prepared to give me that option, he said. If it comes off, great, I've got a good team, and if it doesn't, the plan was to follow Adrian to McLaren for 98 and hope a seat might be free. But there was every reason to believe Damon and Arrows could surprise a lot of people in 97. When Walkinshaw acquired the keys to his new outfit, he stressed to the media, "We are doing this to create a team that can win." Podiums were stated as the minimum expectation for 97, with race wins scheduled to follow in 98 and a full-scale assault on the world title in 99. It may sound fanciful, admitted Bruce Jones in the 1997 season preview guide, but several gamblers would be more than happy to accept the wager. And it wasn't hard to see why, when one took a look at the variety of ingredients Walkinshaw had brought in to give his team that extra step. First was a new face planted at the helm of the design team, Frank Durney. He was a veteran when it came to the sport, having been amongst the paddock since 1976, and boasted a portfolio of some very successful cars, including the Williams FW07 and 08, which had scored 4 world titles combined. Just as importantly, the guy was a pioneer. He had been credited with game-changing design choices, such as perfecting the use of active suspension, something previously dabbled with by Lotus, which provided Williams with such an overwhelming advantage over the field that it had to be banned to level out the competition. On top of that, he was amongst the first to implement tools such as CAD and on-site wind tunnels. In short, Durney didn't just know his onions, he knew the entire farmland. His first Arrows offering, the A18, would be amongst a small bunch running on the new tyre in town, Bridgestone. These could prove to be a secret weapon that will help the team move on to a new plane of competitiveness, Jones mooted. Hill had tested the Bridgestones on an old Ligier at the end of the year and described the experience as very encouraging. Most others were sticking with the tried and tested Goodyear compounds, which had monopolised the field for 5 years, and with no competition in town had subsequently seen development slow to a crawl. Bridgestone, meanwhile, had pounded through 20,000 miles of testing and burst onto the scene with a tyre substantially more durable than what Goodyear could offer, which would prove a key strategic advantage for those who had a competitive car to match. The right tyres can be worth a gain of a second a lap or more, said Hill, so it would just be a matter of getting the car to within a second of the frontrunners, and the tyres would do the rest. Powering all that forward was an exclusive engine deal with Yamaha. Here was an operation dining out at the all-you-can-eat buffet of world championships. In motorcycle racing, anyway. In F1 circles, success had been a little harder to come by, with a solitary third place from the past 8 years being the sole highlight in a very short best of Yamaha clip package. And most of 96 in the back of the Tyrrells had been spent going pop before the checkered flag had even been unsheathed. Even with this arguably weakest component of the Arrows lineup, there was a sprinkle of positivity to be found. Walkinshaw has a way of convincing suppliers to raise their performance, insisted the previews. That was enough for most to assume an air of quiet optimism that Yamaha were about to finally get things right, and those rainy clouds would dissipate into Wayne Rainey kind of days. The signing of well-backed Brazilian Pedro Diniz as the other Arrows driver would provide Hill a sound and steady number 2, but one never likely to rock the boat or cause Damon any manner of slight twinge, let alone headache, and would provide Walkinshaw most of the funds required for Hill's salary, allowing other revenue streams to divert into more development and upgrades, all of which could be found at Arrows' new headquarters, departing their old shores at Milton Keynes to TWR's own factory in Leafield. Still, to perhaps look at matters on a more realistic nature, few felt that even the introduction of the reigning champion could drastically improve the team's fortune. Even in modern day F1, the pecking order is rarely shaken up so drastically. Indeed, other than Aston Martin's brief vault through the field in 2023, and barring a change of regulations which will inevitably jumble things around a fair bit, it's a less than common occurrence. As it was now, so it was then. The smaller teams may have found some new benefactor and have some new bits to show off, wrote Jones, but it's been a long while since anyone other than Williams, Ferrari, Benetton and McLaren were in the top 4. Not for nearly a decade, to be precise, Bruce. Fun fact, that had been Lotus, who had nipped into 4th place in 1988, and actually finished level on points with another team, one by the name of Arrows. On the 9th of January, the Arrows A18 was unveiled to the public, and Damon declared it a sexy little number. "There's no reason I can't win a Grand Prix in this car," he told the gathered journalists. "I've had a good period celebrating the championship, but now I've had enough champagne and I'm raring to go again. There's every opportunity for this team to do extremely well." That was about the highest point on the positivity graph, and within a week, it began to head into a steady decline. On the 17th, Hill took to the track in an Arrows for the first time for a staggering 1 lap, after a gearbox software problem at the factory delayed the team's arrival at the Jerez circuit until the late afternoon. And as they say, when it rains, it pours, in this instance in both meanings of the term. Bad weather plagued the rest of the test, as did technical gremlins, which routinely left the Arrows sat in a garage with clutch and gearbox problems. When he did get to turn some laps in the car, Damon offered a real compliment sandwich when it came to his impressions. The car was quite nice to drive, probably because it was so slow. There is not enough horsepower in the engine. It didn't have any downforce, but it was well balanced and felt really good on the Bridgestones. Scraping about for the faintest positive conclusion, Hill added, "We have the potential to improve more than any other car on the grid, and I am determined that we will make progress throughout the season." By the start of March, expectations had crashed back down to planet Earth, as Damon admitted what everyone and their respective mothers had been saying since day one: "I'm not going to win the title this year." As for his hopes at the season opener, Damon had accepted a race win wasn't on the cards there, but hadn't given up hope of winning at least one race later on in the year. Instead, his sights were set a little bit lower, stating, "If we can qualify in the top 10 in Australia, that would be a tremendous achievement." What a downgrade it was to see the reigning world champion merely hoping to qualify in the top 10 for his first race with the iconic number 1 emblazed across his car. And as it turned out, even that minor goal would prove to be hugely over-optimistic. Gearbox difficulties restricted his final practice running to just 9 laps, prompting a switch to the spare car, which subsequently developed an oil leak. To add to Damon's woes, this was an era wherein the 107% rule was in full effect, a sporting regulation that prohibited those who failed to set a lap time within 107% of the fastest time in qualifying from racing, in order to weed out the weaker operations, or those drivers with more in their bank account than driving talents. For the majority of the session, Hill languished outside that threshold, and it wasn't until mere minutes before the end of that he squeaked under the bar, qualifying a lowly 20th. Damon described it as more disappointing than embarrassing, as his goals tumbled down to the lofty heights of, "If we can finish, it would be really good." Old rivals Villeneuve and Schumacher amongst those to lament the sight of their former foe so far down the pecking order. "He is not one of those guys who are 5 laps behind everyone else all the time," said Jacques. "It is difficult for me to see him back there." Thankfully, no one really had to pay much mind to Damon on race day, since he never even started the race when his throttle snapped on the formation lap. "I always knew it was going to be tough," admitted Damon, "but I thought I would get more than 1 lap in." Things couldn't go much worse, and indeed things looked considerably brighter in Brazil, with Hill hitting that early season target of qualifying in the top 10. Damon declared he was feeling 500% better than he did in Melbourne and was targeting a big chunk of points the next day, with a cheeky wink to camera, maybe a win if some rain was on the way. The race, though, was stubbornly dry, and the only cascading liquid to be found was fuel leaking from Damon's race car. Back to the spare car it was then, wherein Hill climbed through the order, dicing with the likes of Schumacher and Alesi at one point as he ran as high as 4th, before slowly dropping down the order after his first stop and then retiring with an engine fire on lap 69. With his Bridgestone still looking good, a rise back into the points wasn't out of the question. Adding to that air of positivity, Arrows confirmed a new electronic and engine package would be coming in Spain. There was more duelling with Alesi next time out in Argentina, albeit a little closer for comfort as the two came together while scrapping over 7th, both spinning but soldiering on. Alesi finished just outside the points. Hill only made it another 16 laps before pulling over with an engine failure. In San Marino and back in the spare car once more, it took Damon just 12 laps to produce another wayward wallop, this time clattering into the Prost of Shinji Nakano and receiving a one-race suspended ban, despite Damon's protests that Nakano had turned in on him. With 4 races gone and 0 finishes, it was unsurprising to see the first reports of Damon's dissatisfaction with the project beginning to seep into the media, with Hill warning Arrows, "It's important for me to know what the future is next year for the team. I have to plan ahead." The message was loud and clear. Something needs to be done, or I'm off. That something was some firing and hiring by Walkinshaw. The Tuesday before the next round in Monaco, Durney was given his marching orders, and another veteran of the sport, John Barnard, formerly of McLaren and Ferrari, joined as technical director. It would be a while before his influence could be felt, however, and Hill was disappointed to qualify 13th on the Monte Carlo streets, though hopeful of points the next day if he could finish the race. "The thing about Monaco is it's always fun," said Damon. "It doesn't matter what time you are doing, it's fun and exciting." Hill proceeded to have a hoot and a holler when he retired after a single lap, with some exhilarating broken front suspension from a thrilling collision with Eddie Irvine. Just as unfun was the body blow that the newest spec of Yamaha V10, the Spec D, which had already been delayed since San Marino, just didn't work. It had been hoped it would bring about some welcome aspects to the program such as power and reliability when Deniz tested it at Magny-Cours in May, and it lasted a single lap before blowing up. Stuck with the stuttering first model, by Spain, Hill was now having to refute accusations that experience with Arrows was just like being in Spain, but without the S. "I have a lot of faith in Tom and the Arrows team," stressed Damon. "It's been a tough season, but I've been through tough seasons before, and this is a great car in the early stages of development. These things are not going to happen overnight." Things weren't going to happen that weekend either, with yet another engine failure on lap 18, which prompted Walkinshaw to state he'd had a very serious talk with the manufacturer, presumably containing several unbroadcastable words. "I have every faith that Yamaha will do everything they possibly can," assured Tom. Yamaha brought the Spec D to practice for Canada, and in a shocking turn of events, it blew up. Via a spin in qualifying and partly assisted by a shortened race after a horrifying crash for Olivier Panis, Hill and his Arrows finally finished their first race of the year down in 9th place. There was a brief flicker of hope that breaking that run of retirements would kick-start things. Indeed, a glimpse at the timesheets for first practice in France would indicate the long-forgotten sight of Hill topping the field. That was more due to wet conditions, and when technical problems struck in qualifying yet again, it was back to the spare car and back down to 17th. On lap 1, maybe seeking a shortcut to make up lost time, Damon went for an excursion across the gravel, damaging his nose and prompting an early stop that would leave him a lap in arrears, and he would trundle home in 12th. After 8 races, the world champion had scored 0 points, let alone wins, and was pondering a move to change his name to Damon Hill. You have to scroll all the way back to Alberto Ascari in 1954 for the last time a defending champion had such a woeful time, and even that year came with a caveat that Ascari had only taken part in 3 of the first 8 races. With vacancies popping up across the grid, the rumour mill kicked into action by suggesting Damon would be on the move before the year was out. Sauber were on the hunt for the 4th driver of their second car that year, after Nicola Larini had been fired, his replacement Gianni Morbidelli had broken his arm, and his replacement Norberto Fontana had been thoroughly unimpressive. Further up the field, Prost were on the hunt for a lead driver after Panis, who had risen as high as 3rd in the World Championship, had broken his leg. At the start of July, Autosport reported Damon would be off to Prost by the next round at Silverstone, and had already gone for a seat fitting. The Prost had narrowly missed out on a couple of wins that year already, with someone like Hill behind the wheel. might have delivered on that early season promise. By the time everyone got to Silverstone, though, journalists were hastily scribbling out the reports of Damon leaving of his own volition in favour of the much more eye-catching suggestion that Hill would be sacked. Walkinshaw's own frustrations had blown up with a quote from the Scot declaring, "Any professional sportsman is only as good as his last race. If money does not motivate you, then the fear of failure certainly should. It's an application problem and we need to sort it out." The statement was refuted by both Hill and Walkinshaw, and thankfully tensions dissipated a little more on the Sunday, when Damon brought home his first point of the year in 6th place and promptly celebrated in front of the crowd like he'd won the Grand Prix itself. After all, given how the year had gone, that would be the closest he'd ever get to winning a race that year. Right? Via an anonymous affair in Germany where Damon had trundled home a lapped 8th, the F1 circus arrived in Budapest. The tight and twisty Hungaroring had been good to Damon in the past. His first win at the circuit had come in '93, and in the previous 3 editions he'd never finished lower than 2nd. But the '97 edition would arguably trump all those. From a stunning 5th in free practice, that pace proved to be anything other than a flash in the pan when he went and qualified an outrageous 3rd, having previously languished in an average 14th before this point. To further illustrate how out of nowhere this performance had come from, this was Arrows' 299th Grand Prix start, and just the 2nd time in that long history that they had qualified in the top 3. Finally back at the pointy end of things, Damon was understandably buzzing with positivity. Now I will go out to really enjoy myself in the race. Can I win? Of course I can. Anything can happen. To echo that, we should remember one of Murray Walker's iconic lines. Anything can happen in Formula 1, and it usually does. A great start saw Damon vault past Villeneuve into 2nd place. Running behind Schumacher for the first 10 laps, it soon became apparent that tyre choices were about to play a huge part in the afternoon's activities. The Bridgestones were as grippy and durable as ever, but as for their competitors, as Hill put it, Goodyear played too bold a hand. Their tyres turned out to be like chewing gum. Within a few laps, Damon spotted his old foe's tyres blistering and knew he had a fantastic opportunity ahead. On lap 10, the Arrows got a great exit from the final corner and dived to the inside line of turn 1. In one fell swoop, he'd achieved 2 miracles. Firstly, he'd managed to overtake Schumacher without the 2 colliding, and secondly, he'd put an Arrows into the lead of a Grand Prix for the first time since 1989, and only the 4th time in 20 years of racing. But better yet, it was a lead he didn't look like relinquishing any time soon. Reflecting on it years later, Damon recalled, "My car was handling beautifully on this dinky little track, where horsepower was not at a premium. You just needed a nimble car and a good driver. I could hustle the Arrows around that track better than most." Hill led for 62 of the next 66 laps, as the Arrows brought about a 3rd miracle of the day, running not only quickly, but reliably. The car kept going and going with every lap that went by. I thought, this is ridiculous, beyond anyone's wildest dreams, recalled Damon. And that's when it all went Pete Tong. On lap 74 of 77, with a 35-second gap to Villeneuve, the hydraulics failed. The engine was ticking over and Damon was stuck in 3rd gear. Never mind the win, it would be a miracle to bring the car home without it stalling. Problems like that usually stop you within half a lap, said Damon, and he had 3 more of the bad boys to complete. The Williams took 9 seconds out of him the following lap and then 20 the lap after that. With 1 lap to go, the Canadian was all over Damon's gearbox. With the last roll of the die, Damon weaved on the straight, desperate to make his Arrows as wide as possible. It wasn't enough. Jacques took to the grass to negotiate past his old teammate and cruised home. Hill later quipped, he could have just gone past me at 40 miles an hour and still won. Heroically, Damon brought the car home in 2nd. After the race, he offered forth a philosophical perspective. I'm very pleased for the team, though disappointed we didn't win it. 2nd place is better than nothing, and we almost got nothing. It would later emerge the problem that had denied Arrows, Bridgestone and Yamaha their first ever victories was a broken washer on the throttle linkage worth a mere 50p. The measure of any driver is whether you take the winning magic with you when you move from one team to another. Damon's own words from his autobiography. Sticklers will say he hadn't done so, but it was inarguable that he had come oh so close to doing so in Hungary. But this once-in-a-blue-moon occasion still left him unconvinced over Arrows' long-term prospects, and thus it was back to his old plan A for the year. Use this performance to press the advantage with McLaren's Ron Dennis over a 1998 seat. McLaren were about to enter a golden patch with the 98 and 99 drivers' titles swiftly beckoning, and even without the power of hindsight, most could sense those good times on the horizon. An Adrian Newey-designed car, backed with McLaren's outstanding facilities and powered by the mighty Mercedes engines, made the Woking outfit a thigh-rubber of a proposition for most of the field, Hill included. If I could get in there, I would almost certainly be in contention for another championship. That if was a big if. Hakkinen was safely ensconced in one seat, which meant turfing out his old Williams stablemate David Coulthard from the other, and that was easier said than done. DC was still young, still very quick, and was well regarded by both Dennis and Mercedes. But with some gentle persuasion from Newey and Hill's manager, enough of the McLaren bigwigs had been suitably convinced over signing Damon, prompting a conference call between several of those key personnel, Hill and Dennis. "We would like to have you on the team," said Ron, "but we'll pay you on performances only." The offer was $1 million per race win and a base salary of a quarter of what Arrows were paying, with not even a base retainer from the reigning world champion. "Thanks, but no thanks," said Damon, and he promptly hung up. Turning down the best drive in the field on the basis of money may rankle with a few who'll argue it goes against the spirit of the sport. But as the motorcycling great Kenny Roberts once put it, 10 cents and a world championship won't buy you a cup of coffee. And as successful as McLaren were due to become, there was no guarantee Damon would have supplanted Hakkinen in the history books as the 98 or 99 champion. The reluctance from Ron to seriously consider him reinforces this quote from a 2008 interview with Hill. "I don't think I'd have been very happy. I don't think they saw in me what they wanted from a driver." With that door closed, a disillusioned Damon debated his future in the sport. "Part of me thought, sod it, I'll just sign for anyone and get paid a load of money." There was no shortage of parties with Dosh wanting to splash out on his signature, namely those who had been candidates for a mid-season swap earlier on, in Prost and Sauber, with the Swiss outfit offering the jaw-dropping proposition of £1 million per race, an offer that was reportedly matched by Arrows too. From a financial standpoint, any of them would have been a decent pick, just not from a competitive one. The following year, the trio would occupy the lower half of the field, scoring just 17 points combined. Damon recognised none would have been a happy hunting ground, stating, "I knew I needed to have a chance of winning to keep me motivated." Enter Jordan, an outfit with Benson and Hedges backing, mighty Mugen Honda engines, and a car designed by the talented Gary Anderson. After the Italian Grand Prix, where Hill had, shockingly, retired with a blown engine, and with Walkinshaw having long since departed the circuit, Hill hitched a lift with Eddie Jordan on a private flight, and the two hashed out the details. By the next round in Austria, Damon's 2-year deal with Jordan was officially announced. There was no repeat of those Hungarian heroics in the final 4 races of his Arrows adventure. Points were narrowly missed out on in Austria and at the Nürburgring, with a careless stall at the stops denying Damon at the latter. Japan was anonymous even despite Bridgestone bringing a bespoke set of tyres. Indeed, the sole highlight of the concluding chapters of 97 was qualifying for the season finale in Jerez, where he qualified 4th within 0.05 of a shock pole position. He ran in the points until, surprise surprise, the engine failed on lap 47. With that, Damon's abysmal Arrows adventure and his torrid title defence came to a close. He had retired from 8 of the year's races, the same number he'd won the previous year. With just 7 points to his name, he ranked a lowly 12th in the driver's standings, the furthest the defending champion had plummeted since Jody Scheckter had slouched to 19th in 1980, and with the 3rd worst points tally of a champion, behind only the aforementioned Ascari and Scheckter. Despite Walkinshaw's lofty ambitions and the whispers of upsetting the sport's status quo, Arrows were 8th in the Constructors, some 55 points shy of breaching that big 4. The potential Hill saw within Jordan took a little while to come to fruition, with Damon suffering the dreadful déjà vu of seeing his first 10 races in yellow end either at the side of the road or without a single point. But a radical rework of the car from the incoming Mike Gascoigne turned the team's fortunes around to the tune of a memorable 1-2 for the Jordans in Belgium for what would be Damon's 22nd and last Grand Prix win. Though he stuck around for what would be Jordan's most competitive season with new teammate Frentzen gunning for an unlikely world title, the fires of competitiveness had grown dormant in Damon, and much of the year was dedicated to rumours over his forthcoming retirement. When he pulled into the pits on lap 21 of the season-ending Japanese Grand Prix, citing mental fatigue, it proved the end of Damon's dramas. It wasn't the fairy tale finish some would have hoped for, but it was still an ending better than what Arrows endured. For all the talk of moulding the outfit into a front-running championship-challenging force, Walkinshaw's Arrows proved the antithesis of those hopes. Hill's Hungarian podium would prove to be the last time an Arrows would stand on those steps, and the next 4 and a bit years produced a mere scraping of points, and a lot of time is spent circulating towards the rear of the field in twain with the likes of Minardi, before mounting debts forced the team to pull out midway through 2002, not long before entering liquidation. Walkinshaw never worked in Formula One again. In the interests of saving time, it might be easier to list what didn't go wrong. You could make the argument that, harsh as it might be, their lead driver was amongst those failing to pull their weight. For all of Hill's outward pouring of optimism and hopes, he was riddled with an inbuilt scepticism over the project and subsequent lack of motivation to give it his all. That much was evident from the amount of time he spent casting goo-goo eyes across the paddock at McLaren that year, or the relatively close gap between himself and teammate Deniz, which reflects worse on Damon rather than suggesting the Brazilian was the next coming of Senna. To tap into his writing once more, if all went to plan, it would only be for 1 year. To play devil's advocate, you could hardly blame the man. At 36 years old, having won a world championship and being in a prime position to potentially follow that up with a second, only to be ditched due to factors out of his control, who can say they could muster the strength to then tackle something like a long-term project with a team that, for all the shiny new bells and whistles, was a long way back from what he still could have had? For all the boasts we made at the start, perhaps best taken with a pinch of salt, this was an operation with no shortage of weak links. We have the yowling Yamaha engine, which no amount of sugarcoating could disguise how awful it had been prior to 97, or would continue to be, coming with the 2-for-1 offer of no power and no reliability. And you have the car, that Arrows A18, which, as Damon said, wasn't necessarily a bad offering, just lacking a few fundamentals like downforce or a turn of speed. Part of those flaws stemmed from the inputs of the likes of Durney or Bernard, 2 very talented fellows in the field of design, but whose glory days had long since passed. That said, perhaps that was the best they could manage with what they had, which proved to be well short of what had been sold to them too. In the years since, Bernard has reflected that he was informed there was money available for things when there simply wasn't. I probably pushed too hard too soon for a small team, but nobody told me to stop, or that we didn't have a budget for the kind of deals I was trying to negotiate. Nobody said a word. That leads us neatly onto Mr. Tom Walkinshaw. Here is the man who gathered this symphony of ingredients which proved less than harmonious in the cooking pot. But how did this head chef, for all the rhetoric of his successes in motorsport, get this dish so wrong? The truth is we would be better placed to write any number of poetic volumes on the man, given the regular occurrence of the rhyming couplet wheeling and dealing in most stories concerning the Scot. One tale from Durney recalls, I remember him escorting a bunch of British press around the new factory, and he told them, behind that door we are currently making our new chassis, so I can't take you in there. Behind that door was nothing but earth floor, they hadn't even concreted it yet. If Hill was unmotivated to make Arrows a success, then Walkinshaw was somehow both his equal and opposite in ambition. This was a man who wanted this venture to be fruitful, but for Arrows to be a profitable business first, and a successful racing team second. Of course, you need funds to morph an outfit into something successful, especially one with such a long, trudging history in the sport as Arrows. But you wonder if Walkinshaw's boasts of podiums, wins and world titles were nothing more than just a means to slide in some extra cash, as opposed to a realistic ambition that was being properly sought after. This is something backed up from a 1999 interview with Scott Lanphier, a director of Morgan Grenfell Private Equity, who were considering purchasing a stake in the outfit at the time. "Were you lured in by the promise that Arrows would become the best team in the world?" asked the media. "I can tell you they didn't," replied Lanphier. "They promised Arrows would be the best business." That was certainly the way it seemed to be run. Amongst the many reasons for the stark lack of progress from Arrows in the 6 and a bit years where Walkinshaw was at the helm was a constant shuffling of components there. 9 drivers, from which none ever stayed more than 2 consecutive years, 6 engine suppliers, and a revolving door to the design office from which approximately 11 different people entered and exited. Rather than being an operation ran with the commitment, stability or loyalty required to make an F1 team a success, this was one ran like a rapidly moving marketplace, always moving on to the next big deal. Such was the case from the get-go, wherein names and brands were signed on the basis of marketing potential than any sense of cohesive competitiveness. Pioneering designers who had become increasingly irrelevant. An engine supply with an insistence that 8th time would be the charm, when 7 other goes had failed to prove anything like that. And a disheartened, demotivated world champion, seemingly only coveted for the shiny number 1 he would bring. A status symbol from which any prospective sponsor, regardless of their level of F1 knowledge, could infer the marketing potential of. This was a project that, all things considered, could have or should have been something not necessarily leagues better than what spluttered out in 97, but could have learned, morphed and grown as the years went on. Think a smaller version of what Schumacher created at Ferrari, or a better one than what Villeneuve contrived to achieve at BAR. Maybe I'm just too much of a glass half full kind of guy, because despite all those issues I still can't help but feel there was potential there. If anything, from the one good component of the outfit, those new Bridgestone tyres, which as Hill had said at the right time, could be worth an extra second a lap. One only has to see how high the combination of Olivier Panis and his Bridgestone-shod Mugen Honda-powered Prost flew in the opening part of that year. Later that same year, his replacement, the relatively unknown and unproven Jarno Trulli, led the first 37 laps of the Austrian Grand Prix, and he admitted his Bridgestone tyres were his trump card that day. As we've theorised before, had Panis and Prost continued along with this same momentum as they'd shown before his year was curtailed with that leg-breaking shunt in Canada, the duo would have finished as runner-up in the World Championship. Copy-paste Damon Hill in the same sort of car with the same sort of engine, we could have seen something truly special that year. Think of those brief moments where everything was in synergy like Hungary, and multiply that across a year. Instead, for all the hyperbole and high hopes, here was yet another F1 project that put business first and sport a distant second.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider pulling into the pitbox of my channel, bolting on the tyres of hitting that subscribe button, and tearing off the fresh visor of hitting the like button. I've had word from the pitwall that it's the best strategy available for you.